Welcome to Be Well. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jonathan from Your Why, and I'm truly grateful to bring you these conversations with leaders in their field of mindfulness and living a more mindful life. I come to you with experience of 30 plus years in mindfulness, wellness, and mental health. And I think of mindfulness as us purposely bringing our attention, focusing our attention on the present moment, and doing so without regard to whether it's a positive experience, an indifferent experience, a negative experience, but just opening to what that experience is and being with that. Today's guest is Dr. David Cummings. Hi, David.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. David is the professor of biology at Point Loma Nazarene University, right up the street from my branch here. He's also the author of Everybody's Got Bears. And I must say, he's a member of the Y, the Cameron branch. I may try and get him. You're always welcome to any of our Ys, but come on down the street to the Ryan branch.
That's right.
Today's topic is art, the precious present. And in my background, I didn't share this with you, Dave, earlier, but both my parents were artists. So I was exposed to a lot of art in my life and have a great appreciation of it. And I'm going to quote the beginning of an article that you wrote recently that was in the Union Trib. Now more than ever, the world needs art. Seeing it, experiencing it, offers a powerful connection in this isolated world. So I've offered a definition of mindfulness, but I want to pitch it to you as well to bring through how you speak to it mindfulness is.
Great. Yeah. Well, I would agree with your definition for sure. I like word pictures when I try to think of things because it helps me to recall the details more quickly in the moment when I really need it most. And so for me, I like to think of mindfulness as practicing being in the present moment, not living in the future, previewing, not living in the past or reviewing, living and really being kind of tethered to this moment, right? That's how I think of it. I imagine myself tethered to the present moment so that I can make jaunts into the future, because we need to be able to predict things, right? We need to be able to look forward and make plans and arrangements. It's an important part of life. We just don't want to live there. And so we're tethered to the present even when we're making a little journey into the future and we come back home again to the present. And we need to be able to visit the past to learn from our mistakes, to grow, to heal from past hurts, but we don't want to live there either. So I'm still tethered in the present even when I'm visiting the past, and then I bring myself back again. And so mindfulness for me is staying tethered in the present, living by my senses, or at least really experiencing my senses in the present, taking in everything with my eyes, my ears, my touch, even taste and smell, and really experiencing the present that way, and paying attention to whatever arises, whatever feelings or thoughts arise, and trying hard to not judge those thoughts or feelings, trying hard not to add emotions on top of my emotions, and trying hard not to get emotional about the emotions that I'm feeling. And we'll talk more about that, I hope, as we go on today. So that's how I live and practically understand mindfulness.
That's an excellent operational definition because it's dynamic. And I love the use of the word tether because it has a sense of dynamism to it. So as we're talking about engaging in art in a mindful way, I must share that in my family, I love going to museums, art galleries, and often we do it as a family. But I'll go in and I'll appreciate things, and I can stand and sit and be with something. And the rest of my family is already at the door ready to leave and on to the next. And so I'm always teased for that. But if you will, how do we engage with art in a mindful way?
Right. Well, one of the first obstacles we really have to get over is what you just brought up. We're always in a hurry, right? Our culture, our society, maybe even our biological wiring, we want to get to the point, we want to move on quickly. One of the first obstacles most of us have to overcome for any sort of a mindfulness activity, whether it's mindfully engaging with art or mindful eating or mindful meditation, is to slow down and be willing to actually sit for a while and even sit with the feelings that arise, which is really hard to do when those feelings aren't great, right? When those feelings are uncomfortable, that's often what prompts us to move on to something else. And so engaging with art mindfully starts with a willingness to sit quietly with a piece of art. We're talking now about viewing art that's already created as opposed to creating art. And that's another way of engaging art mindfully. But viewing art that's already created, we've got to start with the attitude of, okay, I'm going to slow down and sit with this and let the feelings and thoughts arise as they arise. I'm going to experience them. I'm going to experience the art, and I'm going to engage with it in that emotional way.
So I'm curious, this is just a bit of an aside, but because you've brought this through in a passionate way, how did you come to this? Do you have an artistic background yourself? I know you mentioned your daughter loves to doodle and is creative, but how did you come to be able to speak on this, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I'm not a skilled artist in any way. I have a liberal arts background, so my undergraduate training was all in writing and journalism and literature. And then when I went on to graduate school, it was all in microbiology and the hard sciences. And so my brain has been stimulated in both ways, in a lot of ways. Literature was really the first art love of my life, and it's still a very important art for me to engage in, whether it's reading or writing. And I do a lot of writing. It's probably the first way that I engage with art is through writing. But honestly, it wasn't until my daughter, my oldest is 20 years old. She's a junior at Azusa Pacific University up in Los Angeles, and she studies animation and visual effects. And she is training with the director of the program as a Disney veteran, great guy. You'd know him if I told you his name and some of his characters. And he's training this very small cohort of students to become professional animators. And it was when Sydney first started taking professional steps towards art that my eyes really started opening up and paying closer attention to what was going on around me. Here at a university, I'm surrounded by some amazing intellectual people. And I already had friends in the arts that I'd never really engaged in conversation with them about how I could, as a scientist and as just a citizen, a non-artist, begin engaging with art. And so I started doing that. And I've gotten some great mentoring from some of the artists on our campus that have really helped me to appreciate art and its power in so many new ways. So it's really just the last few years that my eyes have been opened in the way that they have.
How fantastic. So I'm thinking about some of the conversations we've had about the benefit of mindfully experiencing art. Some of us think of it as an escape from all the news and all the information that we're always bombarded with, and even more so at this point in time. You've spoken to it as that it's a method to reduce stress and also a great deal of mental health benefits. So let's provide that kind of foundation as we launch further into this.
Okay, great. So yeah, mindfulness it can be an escape, and that's actually okay. Sometimes when we say that we're doing something for an escape, we have a negative connotation to it, because maybe we're thinking of negative escapes, people who are using alcohol as an escape, or they're using some other self-destructive behavior as an escape. Engaging with art is a very positive, edifying way to escape, and escapes are actually not only just okay for the moment. They're not just helpful in the moment, but our brain tends to get into cycles that are hard to break sometimes. Okay, so as a biologist, I'm very interested in what's going on in the brain during, let's say, a panic attack, or during growing worry and anxiety, or a melancholy mood that doesn't want to snap. I really like to understand what's going on in the brain, and I hope we get a chance to talk more about that. But in short, what's happening is there's a cycle where, as human beings, we have this, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, we have this really unique ability to think about our thoughts. Isn't that strange? And we can even have feelings about our thoughts. And the same is true about our emotions. We can think about our emotions, and we can have feelings about our emotions. And so they can begin feeding on each other. So a feeling arises, let's say it's a feeling of anger, and then maybe we have a feeling about that anger. Maybe it's shame, that, oh, I shouldn't be so angry with my child. He's just a little guy. He didn't mean to do this. And then that shame gets its own feeling on top of that, and we get stuck in a cycle. One of the great things about an escape, a mindfulness type escape, is it can help us to actually break the cycle and start thinking clearly again, so we don't stay stuck and it doesn't escalate. So I'd say that's one of the very first benefits. You did mention that idea of the escape, but it turns out there's more. There's neurochemical changes that take place when we breathe deeply, when we slow down, when we focus our attention, when we can be somewhat impassive about what arises, what feelings and thoughts arise. When we can remove ourselves from our own emotions, then we stop adding emotional value to emotions. We stop, let's say, shaming ourselves for feeling angry, for example. And so we stop with the anger. We can deal with the anger. We don't have emotions piled on top of emotions. That allows us to deal with whatever we're feeling now. And it also builds resilience for future stressors and challenges that could otherwise go south on us. They could lead us to, say, anxiety or depression disorders as well.
Well, as you started down this path, it was fascinating. I was thinking about that. Have I thought about the thought that you had, that we think about our thoughts and we think about our feelings? And so you can just see the layers upon layers, and then what is being present in all of that. And so to be able to separate out some of that. Uh, I know you brought a couple pieces of art. So let's have an experience of mindfully appreciating art. There's a particular piece, and I'll let you set up what we're going to see.
Yeah, great. I was just thinking, hey, wouldn't it be nice, since we all have a visual connection right now, to look at a piece of art that's already created and think about how we might go about looking at this, viewing it, engaging with it in a mindful way. Josh, if you could put that Picasso up for me. All I did here, folks, I'm no, I mentioned earlier, I'm somewhat of a newbie to the art world. It's not like I know everything about Picasso or I knew the right image to put up here. I just said, hey, everybody's heard of Picasso. I Googled Picasso and I grabbed one of his representative paintings. Now, one way you could engage a painting like this, well, it would be absolutely wonderful if we could do this in a gallery. There's something about the whole three-dimensional space that really adds to richness of the mindfulness experience. But right now with COVID and quarantining, that's a lot trickier to do. But there's no reason you can't pull this up on your computer. And so this is what I did. I pulled up a Picasso. This one has something, I forget the exact title because it's in French, but it has something, or Italian maybe. It has something to do with dying love, with a love that is dying. So you start by looking at the whole piece, okay? Don't zoom in too fast yet. Start by looking at the whole piece. If you're in a gallery, sit down, turn off your phone, try to get rid of the distractions. Maybe even close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. That can be really, really helpful. Now, Jonathan, we're going through a practice run here, and ideally we'd spend a good 15-20 minutes on something like this, but we've only got a couple of minutes. So understand that I'm moving more quickly through this because slowing down is a key first step to mindfulness. But you take some deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth, calm your mind a little bit, and look at the whole piece. And then ask yourself attentively, pay attention to your emotional mind, right? We kind of have two brains going on, and this is the biologist in me speaking. We have a cognitive thinking brain that's conscious and aware, and we have an emotional brain. And for us to know what's going on emotionally, we have to tell our cognitive thinking brain to actually look and pay attention at the emotions. What's the amygdala saying right now? And are we on high alert? Are we feeling happiness or joy? And start learning to pay attention to what thoughts and emotions arise. Maybe something in the colors stimulate a feeling for you. And maybe it's a very vague general feeling. Maybe it's foreboding. Maybe it's dark and gloomy, or maybe something about it is silly and amusing to you. Those are all very, very valid responses. There are no appropriate responses, right or wrong responses, right? Pablo is not here with us to tell us what he meant, and he's not here to judge you for how you're feeling about this. Just let those feelings arise. When you feel ready, maybe zoom in. If you're on your computer, you can zoom in. If you're in a gallery, stand up, cross your arms in traditional art critic style, and walk up to where your nose is almost touching the piece, and zoom in on a region that is fascinating to you. I don't know if Josh is able to zoom in on this image that he's showing. If he can, great. If not, don't worry about it. But on your own computer, yeah, we can just zoom in. Let's see where we end up. Okay, that's supposed to be a nose, I think. So let's zoom in on the nose a little bit. He's somewhat abstract. You don't need to know exactly what each bit is that you're looking at. And if you look at completely abstract art, you're never going to know exactly what you're looking at. And that's totally okay for the process, because the process is simply engaging the work and feeling it. So let's look at this triangle in the middle here. It's got some yellow on one side, a light orange to the right. It's got almost a grid of a darker orange in the middle. And just ask yourself how it makes you feel. And maybe you're thinking, I don't feel a thing. That's okay. But maybe something about the pattern reminds you of something. And whether you're consciously aware of what it reminds you is not necessarily important. It's okay if you do know that, hey, this looks like the tile floor on my bathroom as a kid. And it reminds you of taking baths with your siblings and brings some real joyful nostalgia. Or maybe it reminds you of, the bedroom you used to live in when your parents were divorced, and it brings back a little sadness, a little wistfulness, brings back those kinds of emotions. Maybe you're not sure what you're feeling, but let me tell you, you are feeling something. There's no such thing as I'm not feeling anything, because both halves of the brain, the intellectual, cognitive thinking brain, and the emotional feeling brain are always going. There's always this buzz, this hum. We're aware of the cognitive brain's kind of inner monologue where we're always talking to ourselves. It's very difficult to shush that and make it quiet. We're not always aware of that sort of low-level buzz of emotions. Emotions are a type of thought that come with motivation for action. They come with physical sensations as well, but they're also always there. When we have a strong emotion, some of you looking at this right now might have a strong emotion. Maybe you're feeling a deep, deep sadness. You don't know why, but it's risen to such a level that it's broken through to your consciousness. Those are the easier ones to recognize. When they stay down low, simmering, they take a little more work and thought and paying attention to learn to recognize those and see what's there. The idea is that we can build an awareness of our own emotions, and we can build an acceptance of those same emotions. There are no shoulds. That's an important principle. You don't want to look at this piece and say, well, I should feel this way. Why am I not feeling this way? We're not going to judge these emotions. Go ahead, Jonathan.
What I love about what you've done is you've inducted us and really brought us into this particular piece. And,
Yeah.
and when I experience art, I take in the experience without knowing titles. I appreciate knowing who the artist is. But then when you shared the title, then I start to project into the experience even further. And I saw the colors being such that there was a bit of a sadness there. And then I started to see into the eyes, and I'm very drawn to the eyes. And what I love about Picasso is the eyes and the asymmetrical nature of his figurines. And so you brought us further into the experience. And then what you did, which I really appreciated, is you drew out some of our unconscious projections, the things that we project into the art and maybe not even be aware of. You brought it into consciousness. Is that the bathtub? Is it the tile on the floor? And so you raise the level of awareness. And what I appreciate about art is it is all encompassing of your senses and your emotions. And therefore you're able to be in that mindful presence of that particular moment.
Yeah, I like what you said about how it's all encompassing of our senses, because I feel like if I could reach out and touch this, that green cheek to the left, my imagination tells me what it would feel like. I really want to reach out and touch this. They probably shouldn't let me in whatever museum this is in, because I'd reach up and I'd start rubbing that, because my senses are engaged to that level to where I can almost feel that right now. We can see the textures, we can feel it. If we were here live with him while he was painting it, we'd be able to smell the fumes from the paint and be even further engaged in this creative act. But what we get is the finished product, and we get to see how it influences us, how it impacts us. And again, I want to emphasize that if you're sitting here looking at this saying, I got nothing, There's no feelings, there's no emotions, nothing's rising up. I'm going to tell you as a biologist, the way your brain works, there are always emotions to all sensory inputs, period. They may be very, very low. They may break through to consciousness. The ones that break through to consciousness are the easy ones. They're super easy to spot. Hey, I'm mad because I can feel mad. But it's when they're down low here that it's going to take more savvy and nuance to find those. Something that, well, let me say two things really that can really help in this process. The first is that if you're watching this at home or at work on your phone or on a laptop right now, maybe you found that in the 3, 4, 5 minutes we were looking at this, your mind wandered several times. I want to tell you that's okay. Not only is it okay, it's actually part of, an important part of the practice of mindfulness. Just like if you went into the YMCA when it was open and you lifted some weights, the resistance is an important part of the exercise. Your resistance to focusing on something is part of the exercise of mindfulness. So you don't need to get mad at yourself when your mind keeps wandering back to something at work that's nagging you, or a sound you heard, or your favorite ice cream. Whatever is distracting you right now, it's actually okay. Don't judge yourself or be hard on yourself. Here's where the muscle work comes in, gently leading yourself back to where your original area of focus was. It's that leading you back that's actually like the lifting of weights. It's an important part of it. So don't beat yourself up for, wow, I couldn't last more than 30 seconds. That's okay. You're lifting the weights, you're doing the work and engaging, and this is what's going to help your mind to grow.
That's a great example of the conditioning of mindfulness. The more you do that, the more you bring your attention back, you're developing those neural pathways so that you're strengthening your brain, your mind in terms of being able to be mindful.
Right.
So take us into mindfully creating art. We were talking about appreciating art. How about as a practitioner, as an artist?
Yeah. So if someone were to ask me in a very generic sense, Dave, are you an artist? I'd say no. But when I stop and honestly think about it, I realize that 2 or 3 of my favorite, most important things to me, activities, are actually creative activities. So for years and years, I've done woodworking. Now, sometimes it's very practical. It's just carpentry. I'm putting a frame in for a wall. But other times it's fine. The aesthetic is really what matters, the touch. And I tell you what, working in a wood shop is a wonderful thing for me, right? And so for me, that is one of my central creative acts. Now I'm using power tools. I don't do it the old-fashioned way with all the hand tools. I like the sound and the feel of the power tools. I like the sanding. I like the feel of the different types of wood and their different grains as they move. And I try to engage in all of that when I'm creating something. And I can just get fully focused and lost in it in a very positive sense. So that's one way of engaging. And I want to give a couple diverse examples because often
before you move from there, I
have
to say, because I need to honor a couple people. When you talk about woodworking, right outside my window here, we're creating a pollinating garden. And it's a transformation that we're bringing about to our branch. And we had this chain link fence around it. And Kyle and Lupe, our facilities guys, we brainstormed building out this beautiful wood fence. And they have taken such pride in the crafting of it and actually burning the wood as artists. Wow. And it's phenomenal just to see their joy in this process of creating and it being appreciated by others. So I had to say that. I'll pitch it back to you to take us to another example.
It's such a healthy process. And the reason I'm giving these examples is because often when we say, oh yeah, engaging in art is a good activity, it's good for your mind, etc., a lot of people will say, well, I don't do that. I don't paint. That's as far as they go, right? And I want you to understand that the creative process can be writing. It can be painting. Your painting does not have to be something you could sell. It doesn't have to be good. It's a process, not the final product, that actually gives you the benefits. The final product is fun and it's neat. And if you like it, you can share it with people, but you don't have to. In fact, my wife is now doing, during COVID, she started doing paint by numbers. Remember those when we were a kid?
I do, yes.
They are wonderful. And she's been reporting back to me about the incredible peace and calm that it brings to spend 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, working on this large, intricate adult paint by number. There are adult coloring books. So it brings back kind of the fun from when we were kids, but the subject matter is a little more complex and interesting, and we can really fully engage. You don't have to be an accomplished artist to do this. So those are some examples. My daughter has been teaching me some basic drawing techniques. You know, she's an animator. She creates characters and then brings them to life, and she's teaching me some of the basics on the iPad. If you have an iPad with a little Apple Pencil, I recommend you go pick up Procreate. It's an app that'll let you do anything you want to do with it. It's fabulous, and you can spend hours and hours just creating lines and surfaces and colors and 3 dimensions and all kinds of amazing things, and you can get lost in it in the positive sense of mindfully engaging these senses.
That's fantastic. I know our time is going quick. I want to circle back because I know you wanted to draw a little bit more from your biology background and speak to mindfulness and the brain biology related to this and the appreciation of art and what goes on there. So I'll give you that.
Okay, yeah, I'll keep that relatively short because brain biology is pretty intense. And honestly, I don't understand it at the deepest of levels. But as a biologist, I do dive into this, and I really do want to try to understand this. So I mentioned earlier that we really kind of have 2 minds. We have a cognitive thinking mind, and we have a feeling or emotional mind. And the cognitive mind is largely centered here in the prefrontal cortex, right? In these forward lobes close to the surface, buried deep just above the spinal cord, right? The brain stem are 2 little almond-shaped structures called the amygdala. The amygdala is the heart of the emotional life, okay? It sort of decides how we're going to respond to things, particularly if we're going to respond intensely or not. So for example, you're out hiking on a trail, you come around a corner and there's a rattlesnake. If you notice, you don't have to stop and cognitively think, there's a rattlesnake. What did I learn about rattlesnakes? Okay, should I count the little rings on it? How big is he? Is he moving towards me? And a few seconds later respond, right? Within a fraction of a second, your heart pounds really hard. You stop your conversation with your friends, you stumble backwards, and then the prefrontal cortex can engage. So what happens is when sensory information comes in, okay, from our 5 senses, it goes to a little structure called the thalamus in the middle of the brain. The thalamus has 2 routes. It routes a lot of its signals to the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and says, hey, think about this. Go pretty intense and analyze this and figure out if this is something we really need to respond to. And then it's also got some nerve bundles that go straight to the amygdala. And it goes to the amygdala much faster than it goes to the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala can respond much faster. So the amygdala can keep us alive when we need to respond really quickly, and then hopefully the prefrontal cortex can contain things if we don't need to respond so intensively. So you come around the corner, you see the rattlesnake, your heart pounds, you jump back, and then you realize it's a twig. Realizing it's a twig was up here in the prefrontal cortex, but it took a little bit. And that's okay because your amygdala was making sure you stayed alive. Now, here's the problem. The amygdala also makes a lot of our other emotional decisions that aren't necessarily life or death. Am I going to get angry when my child spills his Cheerios? Am I going to jump for joy or burst out laughing at an inappropriate joke when I didn't get a chance to take it in first, right? The amygdala and that whole limbic system, this emotional brain system right in the middle, just above the brain stem, can actually is powerful enough to override everything else in the thinking brain. So if you've ever been really intensely emotional, whether extremely sad, grieving, traumatized, or just elated with joy or filled with fear, you know how hard it is to think clearly under those circumstances. What mindfulness practice does is it gets our brain trained to think from the thinking part of the brain about the emotions and keep them in check as much as possible. Not piling emotion on top of emotion with that spiral we were talking about earlier. So now all of a sudden, you've been practicing mindfulness for X number of months, and your thinking brain is doing a really good job at monitoring your emotional brain. Your emotional brain wants to burst out in anger, but your thinking brain is now paying attention enough to say, no, settle down. He's only 4, and he doesn't deserve your lashing right now. You're gonna calm down, and you can actually learn some self-control and some self-regulation. Things that might otherwise be very stressful don't become nearly as stressful because you've broken the spiral by thinking clearly about them instead of just piling emotion on top of emotion. There are very clear brain biological ties between our emotional responses and then our ability to self-regulate those emotional responses through the practice of mindfulness. Now, you don't have to be mindful in that moment, right? Your child is angering you, you're not going to stop and look at art, right? Your child is angering you, but you've been looking at art mindfully for the last year, and your brain is now ready to slow down your response and not do something you're going to regret.
That's a fantastic definition of what goes on in the brain in terms of emotions and the mental process of thinking, and how mindfulness actually can modulate that. And some of the research that I've seen, it shows with mindfulness that you actually expand, that the part of the brain actually gets bigger the more you practice mindfulness.
Yeah.
Our time has gone quickly today. I know there's more that we wanted to talk about. The last thing I'll just give you an opportunity to weigh in on is, what can we do today to be more mindful in terms of experiencing art? What can you leave us with today that we can move forward with?
Yeah, great. Well, the good news is that there's so much art available online. That Picasso image I pulled up just a couple minutes before we sat down to talk today. There's so much interesting art available online. And then there's still outdoor spaces you can go visit. Lots of murals. La Jolla has wonderful murals. Chicano Park has wonderful murals. Carlsbad has become a city of murals. And because they're outdoors, we're still allowed to go see these things. You can actually walk right up to those murals, put your nose right up against them, and immerse yourself in those things. So as far as viewing created art, I'd say online and then murals are two of your best, but there are also things, there are sculptures out there. There's amazing architecture out there. There are things that if two-dimensional imagery is not what you're after, there are other things you can engage in. And then everyone can start engaging with art creatively right now, right? Pick up a piece of paper and a pencil and begin giving yourself some freedom and curiosity to begin doodling. If you're really excited about it, find a little YouTube video on how do I sketch people's faces, and you'll start learning a little bit and getting a little bit more involved in it that way. If you've got, I mentioned the Apple iPad and Apple Pencil, pick up Procreate. It's a fantastic bit of software. You will use it forever. It's just wonderful and powerful. Lots of opportunities like that. Those paint by numbers that we talked about, you can go on Amazon and order a couple of those and maybe an adult coloring book and start engaging in those. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and as your attention span grows, you could all of a sudden you'll spend an hour on it and you didn't even realize you were there for an hour engaged in it.
Dave, I really appreciate you offering your expertise in biology, your appreciation in the arts, and your passion for mindfulness and bringing that through. I also do want to reference that we have a link up, Everybody's Got Bears.com, a book by Dr. David Cummings that you can appreciate. And we haven't even talked about another time all the other arts. We talked about some areas of fine arts, there's music, theater, all sorts of performing arts, etc. Go appreciate it, be in the moment. Dave, thanks for your time today. And to all of you, thanks, and be well until our next time together. Thank you.
Thank you.